Welcome to Eastlake. We are an inclusive faith community dedicated to the free search for truth and meaning, seeking to live out a more just and life-giving spirituality in the modern world. We see faith as less about doctrines and dogmas demanding total agreement, but a life to be lived, enjoyed, and given away to others. What unites us is a growing awareness that life is a gift and love is the point. We welcome the entire human family, regardless of race, age, creed, physical abilities, marital or economic status, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So if you are curious and have come to see, if you are tired and have come to rest, if you are grateful and have come to share, if you are journeying and have come to grow, if you are wounded and have come to heal, if you are joyful and have come to shine, welcome home. Today, Kristen and Peter talk with Mary Brandenburg, Bart Campolo, and Sarah Hanson as they begin our new series on mental health, What's on Your Mind? Please check the description for links to our quarterly Spotify playlist and guided meditation.
Sweet. Well, hey, everybody. Peter, Gadd here, and I'm here with Kristen and a couple of fun friends. I'm not sure if they would like that title, but I think they're fun, and I would consider them all friends. We have Bart Campolo here and Sarah Hanson here and Mary Brandenburg, and we're going to hear from all of them today. But we're kicking off a mental health series. This series is going to be focused over the next few weeks on the topic of mental health, and we're going to dive into a number of different topics related to this big topic of mental health. Today, we thought we'd kick off the series with a panel, with kind of a group conversation about a really big topic, mental health, and kind of get a little bit of background. And we wanted, because the topic is so big and there's so many different perspectives and so many different ways to address challenges within the field of mental health, we wanted to get a number of different people on the conversation who are in the field to give us their expertise. I do want to make a disclaimer that not one of these individuals has everything. They're one of the biggest things everybody said to me was, I'm happy to share, but I do not want to be the one person who speaks on behalf of all individuals or the entire field of mental health. And so we're not going to do that. But we do want to get a lot of different perspectives because this topic is important. And if you think about it, I'm not sure Kristen and I should be doing a bunch of talks on mental health. We thought, hey, let's actually get professionals who are experts in the field to give us some of their expertise because it's a very important topic. So with all that, I think let's start with a few intros. Just maybe you can share with the group and those of us who are watching and listening, a little bit of your background and what drew you to the field of mental health. And so Sarah, I'm going to put you on the spot and make you go first.
Okay, great. Hello, my name is Sarah Hanson, and I decided to get all of my schooling in psychology. So I got my undergrad in psychology and then went on to get my master's and my doctorate in counseling psychology. So I've been in practicing for the last 12 years, mostly in individual private practice, seeing all ranges of age, lots of different things. I think what drew me is I wrote down a few notes and I felt like this was a good, the way I would say it is I love people and I love puzzles and a really good story. And I feel like what counseling specifically, I think I get to do all those things because I really like to try to help someone figure out what's going on. And that's kind of that puzzle part. And I really love listening to people's stories and I really love people. So that's me.
I love it. Thank you. Thanks for joining today. How about you, Bart?
Hi, I'm Bart Campolo, and if many of you East Lakers have seen me before, live and in person and all that stuff, and I actually came to be a counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor, as of 6 months ago, and I came to be a licensed professional counselor in a very East Lake kind of way. I grew up in the church. I was in kind of all these different ministry roles where, among other things, I would sit and talk with people one-on-one about stuff the way Sarah was just talking about. And so I really became comfortable in that context and doing that stuff. And then when I sort of transitioned out of evangelical Christianity. And I spent a number of years trying to figure out, like, what does it mean to be a minister who doesn't believe in God? And I was a humanist chaplain at USC. Anyway, the long and the short of it is I figured out, like, you can do that, but you can't make a living at it. And so I was like, is there anything that I did as a minister that is transferable skill? And it was like, my wife was like, well, you used to talk to people one-on-one about their problems, and people like to talk to you about that stuff. And you like to work through things and all that curiosity stuff. And I was like, so I went back to school and became a counselor that way. But like, I really came at counseling out of a community building background. And so the big part of mental health that I'm most excited about always ends up being about helping people connect with other people.
That's awesome. That's great. How about you, Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Brandenburg, and I've not been in the professional business for that long. I've only had my license 15 years, just 15 years last week, or a couple of weeks ago. And but like Bart, I came to it through ministry, and I can remember when I sent my last child off to school, my pastor saying to me, well, Mary, it's about time you got paid for what you do all the time. So I went back to school, and I had to finish my bachelor's. I still had some credits left, and then go on and do my master's. And I've just been running ever since, feet to the ground. But, as my mother always said to me, Mary, you've given your whole life away. So now I'm getting paid for what I've done. And, but I have been in ministry, I started 48 years ago. So it's been a while. And what really drove me was that when I was a kid, people didn't talk about anything. I mean, now, you go on social media and we're talking about sex and, and everything else. But I had things that happened to me. I had things that I experienced, and I had no one to talk to. And having grown up in an Irish Catholic family, when my mother read my diary when I was 16 going on 17, she sent me to the Monsignor. And I tried to tell the Monsignor what was going on, and he told me, God bless him, to offer it up for the poor souls in purgatory. So all you ex-Catholics out there might know what I'm talking about. And to which I responded not very nicely out of my mouth. So, and I thought for sure the lightning was going to come through the window and strike me dead. And it didn't. And that was pretty life-changing. So I kind of made a commitment in my heart that day that if I could find help, I would, for the rest of my life, always hold out a hand to others that they might also get some help, as much as I can offer. Yeah. And I don't know everything for sure.
That's amazing. Mary's starting us off with some fireworks. I like this. This is great. That's helpful background from all of you, and thank you. And obviously, maybe Kristen, you could start with your question. I know that ultimately, like, we're wanting to do today is address mental health as a general topic and kind of how it's progressed and why it's maybe a bit more of a topic that's come up recently. But I think your question's maybe a good place to start for the group. Hear different perspectives.
Well, thanks you guys for being here. I'm so happy to see you all. And I see Sarah, and I've gotten to see Bart when we did our conversation for the series before. And Mary, it's so good to see you. I miss Mary sitting in the front row of Eastlake with Craig, nodding your head. You're like one of the most active listeners. And it was always just so lovely to have Mary and Craig sitting right there. And so just a special, I miss you. It's good to see your face. I haven't seen your face in so long. So I think, when Peter and I were talking about what do we want to kick off the new year with, this was one of the things that we spent some time talking about, the arena of mental health. And it feels so big. And I think it is so big. And so I feel like it's become more prevalent. The term mental health, the idea of therapy and counseling, and the idea of being able to say publicly, I'm not well. And I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, why do you think it's so prevalent now? Is it easier to say that? Are people more willing to share? Has the world gotten worse? Like, is this really the case, that the world is worse, so many of us are not feeling like well with our mental health? So I guess my conversation starter for you guys, my question is, why are we hearing about it more now?
Who are you going to put on the spot with that one, KB? Who do you think has to kick us off?
Sarah, let's start with you.
Okay. I think there's probably multiple reasons. I do think there's I just like to think of all the pessimistic reasons why. I do think money plays a factor, because I think big businesses realize that when people struggle, they don't perform well in their jobs. And I think overall there was this push. I think social media, I just think the access of information, people were starting to realize if people are struggling internally, they don't perform, and then there's sick leave and all that. It costs money. And I think that is pessimistic, but I also think it's a really positive thing. Like, yeah, it does matter. You are impacted a lot. Family life, your job, everything can be impacted by how you're feeling and how you're doing on all of those levels. So I feel like a big thing is just the access of information and social media. And I think the younger generations are just more open and versed, and they have all the language to talk about it. And so I think you're just starting to see the stream up effect of that, is my thought.
Yeah. Do you, maybe Bart or Mary, one of you can comment on this, but like, I think about my grandpa who passed away, and he was 99, and he used to say to us, the world has always been ending. Each new president is the worst president we've ever had, and everything will be fine. And I'm wondering, like, again, the question of like, has everyone always struggled or with life in general, or do you feel like things are actually worse?
Sarah, Kristen, rather, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What I would say is, like, I would say that people have always struggled. And what maybe has changed the most is not that people have struggles, but rather how they cope with them. There was a time when people grew up around their families, and everybody lived around people they had grown up with. Mm-hmm. And the kids you went to elementary school were the kids you lived in the village. Mm-hmm. And so in that case, the pressure on a marriage, for instance, wasn't the same. Like, your spouse was your spouse, and maybe your co-parent, but like, you had friends down at the pub, or you had friends in your circle, and you gardened together, and you had your family. And so the weight of, who do I talk to about things? Where do I get perspective? How do I get comfort? There were people all around you. Now you live in a world where people are much more isolated. They move for jobs, and they live in a city, and all of a sudden, you might move to a new place, and your wife is, or your husband or your spouse or whoever is supposed to be your best friend. They're your business partner. They're your lover. They're your confessor. They're your exercise partner. And so I think a lot more people are feeling isolated and have fewer resources. So almost every therapist I talk to says, half of my clients, if they had one really close friend, they wouldn't need therapy. They're really hiring me not to deal with a serious mental illness, but dealing with a real case of isolation and a sense of they're looking for basically they're looking for a friend.
Mm.
And so I think that we live, and then you say, well, what's happened in the last 10 years with social media and the rise of that? And you say, well, people are so much more connected, but all the data would suggest that on some superficial level, people feel more connected, but actually that stuff ends up making us feel more isolated and more cut off. And we see other people having their curated lives, and we compare that to our uncurated misery. And so we feel more isolated.
Oh, that's such a good way of saying it.
I think you have a lot of people that the reason that they're struggling is because they're isolated and emotionally isolated. And so, you said, wait, your grandfather's right. Like, people always had trouble, and you go like, but people had many more built-in ways, coping mechanisms to deal with that trouble. And now it's not so much.
Yeah.
I saw you raise your hand earlier too, Mary. What were you thinking?
Well, a number of things which have been said. In fact, I kind of challenge many of my clients to explore what taking a risk looks like in therapy, in our relationship, so that they can take this experience out into their personal lives and find out who's safe, who's not safe. I know some people hate the word safe. However, some people just aren't. They're just too toxic to be safe. Whatever you tell them, they're going to find some way to use against you. We see that on social media all the time. I want to say too that there's always been suffering. There's been suffering for as long as there's been people. And we have to accept that. But what Bart was saying about community and family, I grew up in this immigrant family community that you had people around you, and you had support and people who believed in you, people who knew your story. Living here in this little town of 3,000 people in central Utah, I'm seeing that when I meet the radiation tech or whatever, and they ask where I live, and I'll say, I bought the Dillon's house. And people know exactly, how to locate me. And that's what I'm experiencing with the people that I've met around here. But I think there's another aspect that has really brought this idea of mental health to the forefront. And before I get into that for a moment, I just want to say that poor mental health does not equal mental illness. I mean, we all, every single one of us, have tough times, have tough days. We have our, who called it the dark nights of the soul. I mean, they just happen. So yeah, Grandpa was right. And Sarah's got it, that there's an awareness. There is a business aspect to this, that people are looking at profitability and they want their workers to bring them their profit. So they have to bring them their best. But I think that that maybe one of the newest things that's come to the forefront is our children and the concern for children that has been expressed with so many children being in isolation. I have many clients who are teachers, and children are behind. And I'm not talking just about in their education, but in their social skills. There's so much that happens in a classroom and on the playground, and it couldn't happen when they were looking at 30 little faces and a teacher on the screen. They didn't have it.
Yeah, Kristen, that would be the big unspoken thing where you say, why is it so? Yeah, well, there was this thing called COVID.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really affected a lot of people's mental health.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sarah, you had talked a little bit earlier about, before we started recording, about the difference between mental illness and mental health. Can you talk about that again now that we're recording?
Yeah. To kind of follow up what Mary, I think it's a really important distinction, is just that when I think a lot of people don't know the difference, or at least it gets lumped into the same thing. And I think what Mary's talking about is like, we all have struggles, and hard things happen in our environments, and hard things happen internally. And that's kind of what we're talking about with mental health. Mental illness, and more serious or severe mental illness, is really more, I think, of where some of the stigma can come from in terms of what people are afraid of, mostly because they don't know, right? They don't know about it. There's not enough awareness around it. But I would say diagnoses that would have someone hospitalized, or have someone need to be in a treatment center for long periods of time, things that people, kind of the
bipolar disorder, like
bipolar, schizophrenia, diagnoses that are more, I think they are flashier in the terms of, we see them on TV, we see them, and they're not necessarily always well done, right? Like they're dramatized. Mm-hmm. There's such a stigma and a misinformation about, like, people get nervous when they see or they hear about someone with schizophrenia, and the statistics say they're very, very unlikely to be dangerous people. And so that always makes me really sad, because I feel like you might see someone and there's a fear because there's not an understanding. And there's, I think I find even in how media handles, I feel like it's thrown out, like, well, maybe it was a mental health thing. And I'm like, be careful, because are you talking about mental health, or are you talking about, you think it might be because the person has a mental illness? So I feel like that distinction is important.
When you're asking, I was sort of thinking about, like, all of us in terms of our physical health, you can go like, yeah, I'm not really very healthy right now. Like, I haven't been working out. I've been eating junk food, it's crazy stuff like that. And you're like, we all have fluctuating physical wellness. But then you go like, I was in a car accident and I broke both my legs, or I have diabetes, or I have cancer. And you're like, oh, that's a serious illness. Mm-hmm. That's and I think, like, sometimes it's the same way, that, like, we all have fluctuating mental health, and we could have a really good conversation about how people can improve their mental health. Yeah. And then sometimes somebody just gets hit by a Mack truck of cancer, or they get hit by a Mack truck of clinical depression, or bipolar disorder emerges when they're like 17 years old, and they're like, whoa, like, I never had this. And you go, yeah, that's mental illness. And both are treatable, and sometimes the treatments look a lot the same, in the same way that, like, physical, like, if you're recovering from surgery, they're like, we want you to exercise and eat right. And they're like, and if you're just like feeling cruddy, they're like, you should exercise and eat right. Like, so they overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good example or metaphor there. That's helpful.
Yeah.
And, one of the things I would say about that too is, like, I was sitting with a woman, an older woman recently, who was feeling she's developed bipolar disorder, and she's feeling so guilty for the way that it's, the burden she is on her family, and the way people have to care for her. And what was interesting about it is that I was sitting there with a doctor, and the doctor said, but Jane, if you had developed diabetes, or if you had contracted cancer, you wouldn't be feeling guilty about it. You wouldn't be going like, I shouldn't. He's like, you have a serious mental illness, and, like, it's bad enough that you should have to deal with that. You certainly shouldn't have to feel guilty for having had it. Like, if you got hit by a truck, you would be in a lot of pain, but you wouldn't feel like, what's wrong with me? I have a lack of. So it's like, mental illness is not a sign of bad character. It's a thing that happens to people, just like diabetes or cancer.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, it's Kristen. Just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning in. I hope that you're finding these messages helpful for you in your everyday life. That's what we're trying to do here, is gather around the idea that life is a gift and love is the point, and let's give ourselves ways to move forward in that in our own everyday world. So I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for being a part of this community. To those of you who have participated and given financially, we want to say thank you to you. Everything that we do here happens because people make contributions. People say, I value this place, I want it to exist for me and for other people, and so I'm going to support it. And so we just want to say how grateful we are that you do that. And for those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to contribute yet, we would ask you to consider maybe doing so. If you find this place beneficial, if you find these messages helpful for you, then consider joining us in that way. You can go to eastlakecc.com to make a contribution, and we just always are thankful for the people who want this place to exist. So thanks again for tuning in. Let's get back to the message.
Maybe that is, part of what it seems just like another example of what's changed, or what's maybe a click forward for us societally, would be that we wouldn't put morality, we wouldn't associate like bad choices with a mental illness or a challenge with your mental health. Whereas in the past, maybe whether it was ever explicitly said or not, we've felt that way. Like if I'd have made better choices, I wouldn't be experiencing depression, right? Nobody would say that with something like cancer, or something that maybe lives more in the physical realm versus the mental realm. So I think that hopefully is a click forward for us as a culture, that there's less shame associated with that, and there can be more acceptance, and then hopefully habits or processes, treatments to help people navigate it.
Yeah, I think that my hope is that eventually the mental part just gets removed and it's just health. Because, and I'm sure you both have experienced this too in your practice, but I'm often talking about physical health. That's so much of our physical health is our mental health, and vice versa. So it feels like to separate it sometimes is not helpful. And I'm hoping eventually, if there is a division, it feels like it's starting to break down, but that it's just seen as health. Like you're just going in, and your doctor, which they're doing anyway, or your therapist, they're speaking to both your physical and your mental health, because both impact each other. So you can't separate it.
Yeah, and one of the ways that they're the same thing too is trauma. Like a lot of times things go back to trauma, and that our bodies reflect trauma. Our mental health reflects trauma. And I think it's really important when we're trying to separate these out, that sometimes physical trauma causes mental health problems. And so a lot of times when somebody comes in and they're struggling with something, I'm sort of like, yeah, let's talk about what's going on with your body, because what's going on in your body and what's going on in your heart and in your soul and in your mind, they're all really connected.
That's great. I
was going to say that I love that in our field of psychology that there is an integration, and I think that the ideas of holistic health and wellness have grown up alongside the development of counseling psychology and the different theories, and that people are coming to understand that this fascinating thing that we call our mind, that's held in our brain, that it's part of our body. It's not some esoteric separate entity that hangs out in the clouds, but it is part of who we are. And what Bessel van der Kolk and earlier people like Alice Miller, the Swiss psychiatrist, had taught, is that children hold these memories, those trauma narratives in their bodies. And now science has told us why. With the hippocampus not really being developed until a child is maybe at the early end, 3, but later it could be 5 or 6, which is why our early stories, our early memories, our early narratives don't come into play because the hippocampus holds them. Otherwise, everything is stored in the body. And so when they say that that even a fetus or an embryo can feel what's going on in the mother, there's some science behind that. Yeah,
That's amazing. That's
I
interesting.
thought it's the end of the year and I was working on health insurance stuff and going through options. And I saw a meme the other day that made me laugh that said, who decided that eyes and teeth are separate from the whole health of the body? Why you have to have separate, an eye plan and a dental plan and a health plan. And, but I was so relieved that in these health plan options, there was a section on, counseling and therapy, and this is what the copay is and all that. And I guess I feel like I was a little encouraged that there's some progress that has been made to show that your mental health is part of your whole body health, your whole person wellness. So I was thankful.
Well, that's an upside of COVID, because when COVID came about, insurance companies were told that they had to cover mental health. And now we have the development of things like telehealth. I still see all my clients who live in Washington, and I can live in Utah.
Yeah, that is helpful. Filling out insurance, though, at the end of the year, that's its own kind of trauma in and of itself. That sounds like a challenge. I want to steer the conversation a little bit towards I think maybe we can take something that Bart said and then see if it's a little bit more complicated than that. But you mentioned, Bart, that a lot of mental health challenges that you're talking with people tend to come back to relationships or come back to having a close friend. And I was talking with Brittany, my wife's finishing up her counseling psychology program, and she was telling me the other day about someone, and either she was seeing a counselor or it came up in class that the idea that humans are complicated house pets. Like ultimately, mostly what we need are house plants. We need food, water, we need sunshine, and we need a friend. That's what makes us complicated. That's the only thing that's that much more complicated than a plant. And obviously that's a silly, like dumbed down version of what's actually helpful for people. But do you see general trends about like what are these practices that would help us just have a healthier mental landscape? And obviously, Sarah, I agree with you. I'm wanting to be holistic. We can change the title of a series and not call it a mental health series or call it a health series. But I think in general, when it comes to just the health of our minds, are there certain practices that you tend to highlight or see a lot that we can kind of like just start the conversation with? We're obviously going to do more as we kind of dive in over the next few weeks, but I think at a high level will be interesting.
I mean, I'll give you the most basic one that comes to my mind, Peter, and that is, in no other area of life, I think, do people think that they should naturally know what to do. So, what I mean, as human connection. So, like you might say, like, I'm a good person, so I should have good relationships, and I go like, but you wouldn't say that about like, I'm a good person, so food should appear on my table. You would go like, no, I have to go to the grocery store and I have to cook. I'm a good person, so I'll have money. No, you actually have to get a job and you have to, I'm a good person, so I should be physically fit. And you're like, no, you're gonna have to go to the gym. Like people understand that I have to be intentional about my physical fitness. I have to be intentional about my food, about my economic well-being. But when it comes to relationships, they go like, you shouldn't really have to read books about how to be a better friend, or you shouldn't have to take lessons on how to be a good conversationalist, or you shouldn't have to listen to a lecture about forgiveness to learn like what the elements of a good apology are. Like you should just know how to have a good friendship. And so many of the people that I work with feel guilty that they don't have better connections, but nobody ever showed them how. They don't teach that in high school. They don't have a class on how to be a good friend or how to talk to an old person who's dying, or how to deal with somebody who's lost a spouse. So there's all this kind of relational knowledge and relational skill development that I feel like is a lot of what I end up doing in my practice as a counselor. And I just think, like, for most people, the idea that you have to be intentional and that there are skills that you can learn that will make you a better connector and that will make you feel more of a sense of belonging wherever you are, that this is like, it's more of a craft than it is like a natural gift. And some people are born with, like, they're just easy to relate to, and I'm broken and there's something wrong with me. You go, like, you know what? We all come up with different amounts of raw talent at this, but almost anybody can get better at it if they get some psychoeducation.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's a great one. How about you, Sarah? Is there one that like triggered in your mind?
Yeah, and you're gonna get, I think, really different responses to this. I feel like I remember I was on a road trip with my family, about 11 years old, big white 1980 whatever Suburban, and we're driving, and I remember popping up. This will be a very clear memory in my brain forever. I popped up and I said, I just thought about what I thought about. And I made a song. I'm thinking what I'm thinking. And I probably sang that, and I kept telling my parents, like, I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about.
Oh my gosh.
And that was metacognition. And I was like, this is insanity. Like, I can't believe I can do this. And I feel like I love metacognition. And I think there is so much power when you tell someone, can you notice your thoughts?
Yes.
And can you identify your feelings? And it's like, instead of living like this with everything here, and you are your emotions or you are your thoughts, can you look at them? And I feel like when people loosen the grip and have a sense of presence and awareness of what they're thinking and feeling and being able to identify, I find they don't have to then say, I am anxious. They can say, I'm experiencing anxiety. And I can choose how I'm going to respond to that. I find that to be pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's not me. It's not who
That's right.
what I'm thinking or how I'm thinking or how I'm feeling, but it's not who I am.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's deep.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a great example. And that so just to ask the dumb question on behalf of, I'm sure all of our listeners got it, but I didn't. Metacognition is that's you define that as noticing your thoughts.
Metacognition is developmentally the ability to think about your own thoughts. And it really does happen. Like,
humans are capable of that. I should be doing that right now.
Yes, Peter.
Okay,
we'll chat later.
Yeah, exactly. That's good. Okay. How about you, Mary?
Well, along that lines, it is when we get just out of concrete thinking into abstract thinking. And it is this phenomenal ability that we have that allows us to be able to make progress. Many people who really sunk to the depths during COVID because of the isolation and the 24/7 demands that were on them, and have kind of returned to their pre-pandemic levels. But there are many who are still experiencing demands which exceed their personal resources and their ability to cope. And those are the people, I think, that that many therapists end up seeing in therapy. And so we have these conversations about self-care. And so many people think self-care is going off to the spa by myself and leaving the kids behind, and, oh, husband, make your own food, or, oh, wife, do your own whatever. And I have to, bring them around to some of those things can get to be pretty selfish because they continue to, I mean, they can be very good too. Let me not confuse you, but that self-care really should be things that are not selfish, that not only serve us, but they serve us in such a way that we are also useful to our communities and to all the people around us that we love, and even the people who stand around us at the grocery store. So it's the physical exercise, it's the nutrition, it's creative expression, it's maintaining our sleep hygiene, it's doing relaxation practices and things, and meditation for developing that ability for metacognition and watching our thoughts and paying attention to what we're feeling in our bodies, to things like having gratitude, having the ability to set priorities and to be able to say no, and to develop some positivity, although I'm not talking Pollyanna. Everything's not supposed to be right. But as Americans, we just think that everything has to be done perfectly. And as Bart was saying, we should all over ourselves because we think that we should know and do everything and things that are right. I remember as the firstborn of 7 kids, I thought I was supposed to know everything, how to do it. I didn't know that I was supposed to ask questions. So it's all these things contribute to mental health.
That's a great list.
Mental health.
When you talk about the should thing, and Peter and Kristen, you kind of probably knew that I would not be able to escape this, but a significant part of my practice is working with people that are working through religious trauma. People that have, their faith has changed, they've lost their faith altogether, and they are haunted by the voice of a God they no longer believe in. But just like they can't get over the sexual repression that they grew up in, or the concept of as a woman where they fit into the hierarchy of life. So I deal with a lot of religious trauma, and I deal with a lot of religious transition. And you guys are part of a church that is sort of famously a safe place for people who are experiencing all different kinds of religious transitions. And you go like, is that mental illness when somebody's losing their faith? And you go like, depends on your perspective. I mean, some people say that faith is the mental illness, but the thing that's really important to bear in mind is that a lot of times how a person sees the world, why they think bad things happen, why they think good things happen, to what degree they feel like there's meaning to the universe, or whether meaning is something that we create between us by caring about each other. These things all really have a significant impact on how a person processes the loss of their cat or the failure of a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so you guys have spent a lot of time around spirituality in your lives and in your congregation. And like the idea that like you're like, well, we're going to talk about mental health and then we'll go back to talking about what you believe about God. I promise you those two things sit right on top of each other.
Yeah. That's helpful. The Venn diagram. Well, even while we're bringing it up, right? Like at some point, Kristen and I are brainstorming like what is helpful in terms of discussion for our community. And like, it just feels as if you can't disconnect the two. You can't disconnect being a healthy, beneficial presence in the world from your beliefs, and whether or not your beliefs are sound or based in reality or helpful, and also your mental health, right? It's all very much connected.
Mm-hmm. I think Peter and I both each have kind of like one question before we run out of time. And I want to just briefly touch on, I'm not sure if Eastlake people listening have this perspective, but I know it's out there. What do you say to people who are like, oh my gosh, mental health, and like, everybody just figure it out, get it together. Like, it's not, I feel like there are people out there who are just like, oh, I'm so tired of like talking about feelings and struggles, and like, let's all move on and get it together and just move forward. So why is this important if you don't feel like you struggle with kind of the healthy part of your mind? What do you say to that kind of person or idea?
I'm going to say, number one, be so thankful that you don't, that you were graced with such a life and such experiences that you have resilience. And I'm going to say, wake up and smell the coffee, because the paradigm is changing in our culture. And this conversation is not going away. It's not, because mental health has to do with our emotional, our psychological, our social being. It affects how we feel, how we act, how we think. It's about, it dictates who we are as people. My hands can move like this because not just that I have muscles, but I have a brain that can give directions. And it's the same. It's the mind in our brain that gives the directions to health. And I might say something else, and I might say, be thankful for what you've got, but for goodness sake, develop some compassion, please.
Yeah.
The rest of us need it.
Yeah.
I would add to that. I would say, wait, just set your watch, because I lived my life with, I thought, great compassion towards people that were struggling. And I offered a lot of advice, and I offered a lot of practical help to people. And then somewhere in my 40s, the wheels came off for me. For about a year and a half, I couldn't listen to a conversation and not have my mind drift. And I was sad all the time. And when the phone rang, I cursed it. And I was able to function in my life. I was able to keep doing things. But at home, I wasn't present. And I was about 9 months into it. I said to my wife, I think I might be depressed. And she laughed and she said, oh, really? How long do you think you've been depressed? I said, like a week or two. She's like, man, you haven't been with us for a year.
Yeah.
And it hit me like a Mack truck out of nowhere.
Yeah.
I didn't see it coming. And I didn't know if it was ever going to end.
Yeah.
And when I came out of that, most of my friends would say, you're always a nice guy and always helpful when we're in trouble. But we always got the impression that you thought that stuff was like the trouble, that kind of trouble happened to people that were weak and you were strong. Mm. And it's really different talking to you when we're in trouble now, because you've broken yourself and you know how it works from the inside. And so one of the things that I would say is, like, sometimes it's something like that somebody carries with them through their whole life, a melancholy that they're not able to shake. But sometimes, like, the stuff is episodic or it's situational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And probably at some point, especially if you're that hard, I got it all together person, as you get to the end of your life and your body gives way and your mortality becomes clear to you, like, a lot of those people, then they're like, I'm not in control of my life anymore. I mean, my dad is struggling so much right now in the aftermath of his stroke, because he always controlled his own destiny, and now he is completely at the mercy of other people. And so mental illness is in your future if you live long enough. You live long enough, you will come to a place of deep darkness and depression. And so that's one, I just say, like, set your watch. Like, don't be so, you sort of like, and once you get on the other side of it, you go like, oh, I really, like, I didn't say this to people, but I really did think, like, just snap out of it. Just pull yourself together.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
pull yourself. And then once you've been inside of it, you're like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. What shit I was talking.
I have to echo that, because it is even when just youth and beauty leave.
Mm.
You know, it is part
So
of
worried
the
about
natural process of aging, and you have to decide how you're going to age. And I made a decision in my 40s, when I was seeing it begin to happen, that I was going to do it gratefully and gracefully. No Botox. I'm letting go of hair color, letting it go gray, you know. But it's so true. I remember my father, always so able-bodied. At 60, he said, "Oh, man, this getting old stuff is for the birds." Life has a way of humbling us.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go a different approach, because I like puzzles and people and stories. And I would love to kind of have that person come and say, hand me your phone, hand me all your alcohol or any substance, go sit in a room by yourself with nothing to distract you, and I'll see you in 2 hours. And
I love you, Sarah.
the problem is we numb without even knowing we're numbing, to a point where there's no more edge. I'm reading Brené Brown's new Atlas of the Heart.
Yeah.
Here's like promotion for it. And she talks about that we all need our edges. And I'm thinking, that person who says in that type of way of like, what are you guys talking about? They've numbed to a point, the perfect point, where they're not feeling anymore. And they're not experiencing, they're not thinking about what they're thinking about. They're not aware of their own body, mind. I have so many questions for that person, out of love and kindness and compassion for sure. But I'm very suspicious immediately of someone, because it's a discomfort with other people's pain. When I see people so uncomfortable with other people's pain, it's because it's their inner child saying, hey, like, I know how that feels, and you're not listening to me. There's just a lot of pain, you know?
Yeah. Those are great responses. That's, I think.
To be clear, it was a
Hypothetical.
hypothetical. There's the word.
Yeah.
I
No,
mean,
but it's so great.
But
That's a prevalent, I think, experience, though. I've heard that, certainly.
Yeah.
And I felt that way. It's not that person, right? I've felt that way about some challenges that I've gone through. I should just get over it. Or, I mean, this is sometimes what I tell my 7-year-olds, right? Move on, buddy, right? Like, it's prevalent in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Most of the people that I know, like, that's a great point, because most of the people I know would not say that to another person, like, what's wrong with you? You suck. Get off your ass. Come on.
Yeah.
But they'll say that to themselves.
Right.
They'll say that to themselves. And so, like, that, you know, the things we say to you're an idiot, you're stupid, you're ugly, you don't know anything, you never do anything right. Like, the way we talk to ourselves is a reflection that, and some is the fact that's the way we're feeling about other people too. We're just more polite, but there is that lack of perspective. And I think Sarah's so right. Like, if you want to get perspective, there are some real quick tests we could run.
It's great. What are you thinking, Mary?
A little different. I just want to make sure that somewhere in this presentation is included a public service announcement that if you or anyone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please call the suicide prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or the crisis text line by texting TALK 822-741-741.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think that's huge. We'll make sure and include that too.
Thank you.
In the language for the talk, because that's ultimately what we're even doing this series for, is to make sure that the topic is front and center for us. So I think we can wrap with that. Those are great thoughts from everybody. Thank you for your contributions. I feel like we had a fantastic conversation, and I love to hear the different perspectives on it. And for those of you listening, thanks for jumping in. We're doing this series because we want to get perspective and context from people who are in the field of mental health so that all of us can live better. This is the, as Bart was saying, right, it's all connected. Our mental health to our, and Sarah highlighted this, I feel like the whole theme is that it's all connected to our broader health and how we live. And so we can't separate those two. So I'm excited for where we're going to go in this series. Thanks for your contributions, and excited to hear from you more individually. We're going to do some more interviews with individual contributors over these next couple of weeks. So thanks for jumping in and listening. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
That's right.
Thank you for joining us. To make a donation, head to eastlakecc.com/donate.